All right, everybody. My name is Daniel Bartolo, and I am the final boss that's standing between you and lunch today, okay? So, this is my first time in Africa. Yeah, that's right. My first time in Nigeria, and I'm having an absolutely incredible time. This is my first time at any DevFest ever, so I'm really excited to be here. I came here all the way from New York City. Are there any New Yorkers in the house? Maybe. A few? I see a few hands. Now, there are a lot of Nigerians in New York City. And now it's my turn to be a New Yorker in Nigeria. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for being so welcoming. Everybody has been so awesome. I've heard that this is the 11th DevFest, the 11th year in a row. Is anyone gone to all 11 developer fests? Anybody? No hands. Well, you're here at this one, and you're here to learn. You're here to meet people. You're here to have a good time, and the energy has been awesome. So here's what we're going to do. I want to talk to you today about 5 huge risks around AI, cybersecurity. We're going to look at each of those 5, look at a couple of examples, and then we're going to talk about ways that you, as you are building products, as you are writing code, as you are shipping, can defend against those threats, and you can help people and help your teams defend against AI threats. Why am I here? I'm a product manager at Google. Product managers get to work with designers and engineers and marketers to define what products that you want to build, point people towards a mission, point people towards a goal, obsess about how you're going to solve user problems. And what I do at Google is I work in cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is an interesting field, and it's a very interesting time to work in cybersecurity. And what I do at Google is we focus on defending Google's AI systems and development pipelines from AI threats. So there are other teams who are thinking about how do we use AI to do better security. There are other teams thinking about how to do security in general at Google. And my team gets to work on the question of how do we secure our AI systems. And that's what I want to talk with you about today. We're going to talk about 5 different things that you can do to defend against AI threats. Like any system, AI applications have vulnerabilities and face numerous risks and threats. AI systems face many classic risks, but also AI-specific risks. Maybe you have heard of some of these. My colleagues have talked about them a little bit today. So things like biases, prompt subversion, backdooring into a model, hallucinations, leaking personal information, weaponizing the model, infrastructure vulnerabilities. There are all sorts of things that can go wrong with AI, all sorts of things that can go right too. But today we're going to talk about some of the threats. At Google, we created something called SAIF, S-A-I-F. If you want, pull out your phone and go to saif.google, S-A-I-F.google. So I have a quick video to play for you in just a moment, but I want to show you a preview of what you're going to find on the website. So what we've done is we have tried to break down what a generative AI system looks like. What is the overall design of most generative AI systems today? And then we try and help you as a product builder understand where different risks are introduced, exposed, and mitigated. We're not selling any products here. We're not trying to push any specific solution. We're just trying to give you, as builders, knowledge of how to defend against AI threats. And so this is a resource that I'll be referencing here and there today. But if you take away anything, I would love for you today to go to this website. We have a risk assessment on the website that you can take for free, where we ask you about 10 questions, and then we give you a list of what risks we think you might be more exposed to based on like what your product is or what your business is. Here's why you should care about safe.google and about the secure AI framework. So number one, it's lessons that Google has learned from defending our own AI systems. So Google is one of 3 or 4 companies at the forefront of building new AI systems and doing frontier research. And we've learned a little bit here and there as we've done this, and we want to share that knowledge with you. Number 2, the landscape is evolving, right? Every week, sometimes every day, you can look on the news and see, man, there are things that are happening in this space. Things are changing very quickly, and you need a system, you need a framework for how to navigate that, even if you don't know what those new things are coming. But you need a way to think about them and defend against those risks as they come. Number 3, on safe.google, we break down the top risks into 15 risks. And the idea is we didn't want to be super specific because we want you to have a general framework. We want you to have like a checklist that's easy for you to think about and run, and you'll find that there in 15 risks. And then the 4th thing, like I mentioned, is that through the risk assessment, you can discover which risks are most relevant to you. SAFE is built on 6 sort of high-level principles. I'm not going to go through each one here. I'll just start by talking about number 1. So number 1 would be think about the security foundations, the security activities that you're already doing that are already really important, and then think about how to apply those to AI. So for AI, that would look like something like model access controls, or it would look like solutions for denial of service attacks across your AI services. There are things that you are doing today that are absolutely applicable to AI, and you should be thinking about how that is and how you can implement that and move forward. On safe.google, we break down an AI system into 4 major components. The first component is data. So this is the inputs into AI systems. It's what AI models are trained on. It is the data that you as a user can input into a model. It is the data that comes out of the model after it's done inference. The second component is infrastructure. This is all of the infrastructure, the computation, the model serving, all the back end, all of the things that you're doing to deliver your AI services. Number 4 is the model itself, right? Maybe you've heard of ChatGPT, you've heard of Gemini, you've heard of Claude, you've heard of Mistral. These are all, brand names for models. And each of these producers and providers, and there are many, many more. Llama is obviously a popular one as well, open source. These are models. These are the actual, this is the source code for an generative AI system. And lastly, we're talking about the application layer. Now, I think probably this is a developer fest. I would imagine that many of you are developing applications. Is anybody developing applications here? A few, right? So this is the layer that interacts with the user. Oftentimes, when companies or startups are integrating AI into their services, you're not actually letting someone, or you're not actually giving them direct access to a model. You're just providing a service, and it's your application that is the final layer between the user. And there are various considerations and concerns with your application. So zooming in on each of these components, we'll look at different modules within the system. So application, model, data, and infrastructure. And we're going to look at their risks that are unique to each of those. And again, you can see all of this in greater detail and even in like an interactive map on safe.google. For each component, we need to address the classical risks. So these are all of the normal everyday risks that any web application or mobile application or any digital experience has. But we also need to think about the AI-specific threats. And then at the end of the day, you have to think about what are the controls. Dealing with those risks and mitigations can feel extremely overwhelming. I know for me, like I mentioned, it can feel like every day you open up, the news, you look at TechCrunch, or you're on Twitter and you see the really interesting and sometimes scary things that are happening with AI and that people are doing, and it can feel overwhelming. So in order to help you on that journey and to deal with that overwhelm, we're gonna talk about really 5 specific controls that I think you should consider utilizing today. First, we're gonna start with data, the data component. The first risk that we're going to talk about is data poisoning. And data poisoning attack entails intentionally poisoning a data set to alter the behavior of a model. Note that in the bottom right down here, there's a little visual navigator to help you think through where we're at in the process. So let's talk about data poisoning with a real world example from Gmail. So we have AI models that help to classify whether or not an email is spam before it hits your inbox. And one of the things that we do in order to improve the performance of these models is to look at data that we like to call false positive data, which is how often does someone go into their spam folder, take something that we've put into their spam folder out of their spam folder. Usually that might tell you that we did a bad job for some reason. That might tell you that that's not spam. Well, bad guys figured out how to look at that signal and use that signal to manipulate spam scores. So the graph that you see here is a real production graph that can show how many emails are moving in both directions. Green, the top line, is when you move from inbox to spam box, and the red line is when you move from spam box to inbox. Like any external inputs, the spammers try to abuse those reporting mechanisms to poison the spam filter, and they do this by creating fake accounts, sending emails to them, and reporting it as a false positive in the hope that their later message will not be spam foldered. And to avoid being poisoned, we don't want to use those reports directly. We've learned over time that you can't just take that raw signal that maybe is exposed externally where a bad guy or a bad actor can manipulate it. You want to analyze it and filter it extensively before you take any action on it, and then incorporate it into your model training pipeline. So our first recommendation is model sanitization of your training data. The general way to address this is to never put external input into your reporting mechanism, even if it's fully under your control, and instead carefully filter the data that you use for training. Think critically and intentionally about that data that you use for training. Another thing to think about, and another recommendation that we have, is data governance, meaning you should be thinking about and detecting if you are bringing personal identifiable information, or as we mentioned earlier in the panel, something like perhaps data that's been leaked in some kind of external leak. You want to filter for that, you want to audit that data, and you want to have a clear chain of custody for all of that data so you know exactly when and where it came from. Another way that you can do this is through something called data lineage. So data lineage is the process of tracking and doing this programmatically, where you know where your data came from, you know which models were trained on what data sets. And again, this may or may not be relevant to you. Some startups or some companies are doing more fine-tuning of AI models, and some are just more downstream. Maybe you're just paying, ChatGPT for API access, or Google for API access, or cloud, or whatever. But if you are doing any kind of fine-tuning, if you are doing any kind of optimization utilizing external data, user data, you should be thinking about how you're doing data lineage, how you're doing the sanitation, et cetera. So specifically, I know there's a lot of Google users here, cloud users. Specifically, you can use Google Cloud to track your data lineage, and there's features in here for BigQuery and other ETL pipelines. If you are unsure if you have PII in your data, Google Cloud also offers data protection services which help you discover and manage access to sensitive data. Next, let's talk about infrastructure. Remember, infrastructure is everything that you use to deploy and serve your AI experiences or your application. The risk that we're going to talk about is model source tampering. Your model is one of the most important aspects of your generative AI experience, and you should have a strong control to understand who is accessing your model, who is writing code changes that might change or manipulate your model. And this is a very important thing here because depending on the circumstances, depending on the specific threat, this is a very risky surface area. Yeah, so the next one we're going to talk about is unauthorized training data. So first we talk about, somebody who maybe has access to your model source. The next thing we want to talk about is unauthorized training data. So this is when the AI model is trained on data without the proper consent of the user's authorization or adherence to legal and ethical guidelines. And this can happen accidentally or intentionally. There could be an insider within your organization that takes steps to cause you to train on unauthorized training data, which exposes you to risk, which exposes you to regulation, fees, damages, reputational risk, etc. You have to think of all the angles here. It's a good example here. Hugging Face is a very awesome, trustworthy source, trusted by many for access to AI models, etc. But there was a well-known instance where there was a model backdoor where code could have been executed in parallel, and this is a good example of where if you don't have good controls, you don't know who is accessing or making changes to your models, what can happen downstream. So specifically, we can talk about an AI-specific risk would be an architectural backdoor in a neural network. You can introduce a backdoor into the model architecture the same way you would introduce it into a CPU. For example, as visible in this figure, you can simply do this with creating parallel execution on a specific trigger, but there are more complex techniques that exist. So this brings us to our second recommendation, and I think this is a very good thing, not just for AI, but in general for good hygiene, for good controls, which is you need to enforce access controls on all models, code, and data. So what that means is every person in your organization, every person in your company should not have blanket access to all of the data and all of the code that you are writing against. People should have just the access that they need to do their job. This protects you as a business, this protects you as an employee, this protects the reputation of your company. This is a very important control, and there are lots of things out there that can help you do this. So for example, in Google Cloud, you can easily see who in your organization has access to what data assets at any given point in time. And I know many other cloud providers and infrastructure providers do this as well. This is really an industry best practice that has long been a best practice even outside of generative AI. In addition, in partnership with the industry, Google is exploring how do we cryptographically ensure that a model came from a trustworthy source and that a model was produced by who you think it was produced by. Another way that you can do this in Google's infrastructure is that in Notebook Security Scanner, which is now available in preview, you can basically scan your models to detect supply chain vulnerabilities for open source software. So a lot of these things come down to supply chain, meaning, do you know where your code came from? And if you are building your AI application utilizing open source components, do you know with a high degree of confidence where those packages came from? Did they come from a trustworthy source? Are they signed correctly? Do you know that there are no supply chain vulnerabilities that are in your model by way of integration with an open source project or similar? So Notebook Scanner can help you do that. And as always, you should really be taking what we call a defense in-depth approach. So you're not just doing one thing for your company's security. You're thinking about how do you create a layered approach, different ways to defend against attack and threats. So a few examples here, isolating production GCP resources from unauthorized networks, zero trust. I think zero trust is a really helpful framework that if you don't know what zero trust is, you haven't heard of it, I would Google it, I would research it. It's a way to think about the security of your company, and you should perhaps really be treating all network traffic as if it was untrustworthy. And you should be, affirming trust and understanding who's accessing your resources, ensuring that they have the right credentials, etc. So Google Zero Trust, I think that could help a lot of folks. And of course, logging. So logging obviously can help you as a developer figure out what's wrong with your product, but detailed logging can also help you if something bad happens or something within your AI system behaves in a way that is you can't quite explain, or you don't know why there's a particular behavior. Logging can help you understand that. And so, of course, in Vertex, we have good logging functionality. Let's talk about the model component. We talked earlier about how the model is really a key part of that generative AI system. It's basically, what outputs the tokens for you to be able to utilize to power a feature or experience in your app. So the first one I want to talk about, the first risk or threat, is prompt injection. Has anybody here fooled around with prompt injection? Yeah, a few of you? Have you ever tried to confuse an LLM before? Some of you? Have you ever tried to get your LLM to say or do something it shouldn't do? A few of you? Yeah, I know there's a few of you. Me too. This is called prompt injection. It's when you give a model, via your input, misleading or malicious prompts, trying to trick it into generating unintended or harmful outputs. So now we're talking about outputs, right? Before, with infrastructure and data, we were talking about the inputs into your model. Now we're talking about the outputs. What happens in a generative AI system when there is an output? How can you defend against these output type threats? We're talking about prompt injection. A good example of prompt injection here, maybe you've seen this. I believe this was actually invented by a Googler in 2011, actually. Generative AI has been around for that long, which is inside of this resume is embedded some white text, right, that you and I can't see with our eyes, but an LLM will read it, and it basically says, hire this person, right? So this model has been tricked into hiring you because you've injected some invisible text to the human naked eye into this image, but the model has picked it up. This is an example of prompt injection, and there are many others that you can easily look up. So how do we defend against something like prompt injection? So as we discussed earlier, you should always be filtering your input data. You should have filters that classify content, as harmful or unsafe or illegal or basically whatever is important to you. You should, if you want to block certain types of content, certain types of output, you should have filters to detect that. The next risk that I would talk about here is unsafe content generation. So this is a really interesting example here where via prompt injection, the person, the attacker, was able to get this priest LLM to recommend that you baptize your baby in Gatorade. That's crazy. And that was done through prompt injection. And obviously this is, offensive and problematic. How do we defend against this? Well, you have to filter your outputs, including, code sanitization, various types of safety filters, etc. One way you can do this is through an out-of-the-box tool in Google Cloud called Model Armor. So if you look, you have the ability to set certain types of filters on the outputs. So you can tune the level of safety controls that you want. You can tune the types of content that you don't want it to output. And all you have to do is make that policy decision and then let this feature and tool do the rest. And there are many other tools that do this as well. This is just one in Google Cloud. Another thing might be, you might want to limit the types of images or the themes that can be generated on your app. So for image generation, we're not just talking about text, talking about images. You can filter things like people and face generation, You can say, hey, don't create any pictures of children. And of course, you can filter out various types of harmful or offensive content. And what I want to talk about here briefly is something called Shield Gemma. So I don't know if any of you have played around with the Gemma open source models. Anybody? Hands up, maybe? I see one or two. You should explore utilizing Gemma. If you are a startup, you're a company, you can run it on a bunch of different cloud providers. You can run it on Google Cloud. But built into Gemma is this integration called Shield Gemma, which is also open source. You don't have to use it with Gemma, but it's very easy to use it with Gemma, where it will sanitize both your input and your output. Lastly, let's talk about applications. Let's talk about the application layer. There are two sort of risky aspects that I want to talk about of application layer. The first one would be an insecure integrated component. Now, these models are becoming, or these architectures are becoming more complex as we develop new capabilities in models. So a year ago or 18 months ago, there was a huge focus on chat apps where as a human you can give input or text to a model or images, and then you get back text or images, etc. And now models are being built into more complex systems that have access, API access or programmatic access to various components, various features, right? So let's say you open up Google Workspace, or many others do this as well. You start to see Gemini, you start to see generative AI features built in, and these models now have hooks into other systems. And so now if those systems have vulnerabilities, your model, your experience is inheriting those vulnerabilities. And now those vulnerabilities are a problem not just for that application specifically, but now you have a model that might be calling that API, might be calling that feature, and they are now subject to those same risks. The next thing we'll talk about is unauthorized model action. So it's, these vulnerabilities that are introduced into these generative AI systems, or more and more you'll hear the term agentic systems. So systems that, or applications or experiences that start to be able to make decisions on your behalf, they may be manipulated to take unauthorized actions on your behalf. So if a model can be prompt injected, and it has access to various tools or applications and can take action on your behalf, then now you are vulnerable in multiple ways. So again, we kind of go back to this filtering concept. And in our experience with Gemini, the key risk associated with creating AI applications is the ability for the attacker to abuse the interaction between the model and the plugins by manipulating the prompt to change the API call in order to perform privilege escalation that allows the attacker to access or manipulate data that would not be available otherwise. So you start to string together these different vulnerabilities, and the more capability that a model or a system has, then the more potential damage that can happen because of these vulnerabilities. And so it's very important that we think about how to defend against them. So how do we defend against the last application risks I talked about? Number one is, or the big recommendation here is, you need to sandbox and enforce least privilege on all of your AI applications. So if you research zero trust, you see this concept of least privilege, that at any given time, you should only have the access that you need to do your task or to do your job. You shouldn't have more access. And that applies to humans, and it applies to APIs, and it applies to anything that's interacting with your system. And again, another example here is you need to implement zero trust framework. And you can do this in Google Cloud using BeyondCorp. And if there was another resource that I would recommend you look up is, look up NIST, N-I-S-T. NIST is a great list of various types of controls for security vulnerabilities that you might be interested in applying. And I know NIST has some really great content on this concept of zero trust. Okay, so we're gonna do a top 5 recap. We're almost done here. Number 1, sanitize your training data and track data origin carefully. Number 2, enforce access controls on all models, code, and data. Number 3, filter inputs, including safety filters in transcoding files. Number 4, filter outputs, including web sanitization, code sanitization, and safety filters. And number 5, sandbox and enforce least privilege on your AI applications. Now, if you are building a product, you're running a startup, you're building a feature or an application, I would encourage you to start with these 5. This is a good little roadmap for you to think about. I would encourage you, maybe take this with you to your team to chat about. That could be a great way for you to really bootstrap and improve your ability to defend against AI threats. All right, so this is the largest QR code I've ever seen. This is awesome. So the last thing I want you to do is take a picture of this QR code, open up the link. It's gonna take you directly to a risk assessment that you can take to help you understand which ones of these risks you might be more exposed to. And if you want to ask your boss, you should take it and send it to them. Google is partnering with other companies like IBM, Intel, Microsoft, NVIDIA, PayPal, Protect AI, Trendy, Zscaler, a bunch of others. We've created this coalition, this nonprofit organization where we are doing research and publishing that research around defending against AI cybersecurity issues specifically. So over time, all of these companies, we're donating engineers, we're donating resources, money, we're doing research. We want to share that research with you. This is a resource to check out. If you want to follow me on Twitter or connect, shoot me a DM. That's me, @dbartolo. And we have some time for questions now. Go ahead, you.
So, if you want to create an app like, let's say, Google, so what are the types of programming language you have to learn?
If you want to create an app, what kinds of programming languages should you learn?
Yes.
Well, I'm not an engineer. I can't answer that question. Here's what I would say, and this is a serious response. I would ask Gemini, or I would ask ChatGPT. I would ask, tell it what apps that you like, and then ask it what languages you should learn, and it might have some ideas for you. But I'll let an engineer shout it out. You got an idea for him? Oh, does anybody have a language that he should learn, an engineering language? JavaScript, no. Python? JavaScript. Python. All right, let's do another question. And it's somebody, wait, hold up. If you're an engineer and you like helping and mentoring people, this guy wants to learn what language he should start with. So somebody go talk to him. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
Yes. So, in regarding to the data, what if an application has like a risk? For example, I heard of a story whereby a boy committed suicide due to an AI chatbot who was misleading. I don't know the full details. So these apps now, which might be unsafe to the user, does Google have like a punishment or like a policy or like a fee that applications who use wrong terms or websites who use wrong use of these AIs, they take? For example, like, Europe have their policy, data policy that they pay and others. So this website now, if they are unsafe for Google users, does Google have like a punishment for them, like payment or so?
Okay, that's a really good question. So let me summarize what I think she's asking. So Google produces AI models. Those AI models are used in Google products and they're used in other people's products. What happens when someone else's product that isn't Google's, but maybe is using Google's code or infrastructure, if there's some kind of tragic event that happens, like the example that you gave? And I mean, the correct answer is, I actually don't know. Well, I have a better answer than that. I think companies that utilize tools and infrastructure, they want control over the output of those tools and infrastructure. So that's why, let's say in Google Cloud, you're using an API, you have the ability to control the output of that content. And you have the ability as a company to put various filters in front of that content. And companies have legal liability, and the courts need to decide where that legal liability lies in specific situations. But I think it's an important question that society needs to answer. And I think that I'll just leave it at that. It's an important question. You know, courts, civil society, governments need to decide. There are different approaches that different companies, governments, people take. And I think that's a very good question. Thank you for asking it. Yes, sir, you in the front. Well, you just hold your hand up high and they'll give you a mic.
Yes, there's someone
Yeah, okay,
here.
yep.
Good afternoon. I wanted to ask, for situations where for people building products on top of Google's Gemini, for example, we have edge cases where even with all of the filters and all of the safeguards, it still tends to cross a few lines. How do we adjust for that? You know, how do we measure those type of situations and avoid them in the future?
Yeah, I mean, so here's how I would answer that. So I think that if you are delivering an experience to an end user, you have a responsibility to make your best effort to provide them with, number one, a product and experience that actually meets their needs, and number two, one that seeks to avoid legal, physical, mental, emotional harm, etc. And so I think that what you see now is companies like Google and others, everyone recognizes that there are these edge cases and that no filter is ever going to be perfect. And you know, there is a lot of debate around, you know, who should decide what content, you know, LLMs can or should generate in a given instance. And different governments, different countries, different companies will land in different places on that. Like for example, you know, there are open source models that you can get it to do whatever you want, right? Or there are public models like Grok on X, you can get it to pretty much break any copyright law that you want, right? That other models won't. So different companies fall in different places on that, but I think everyone has an ethical responsibility to make their best effort to defend their users against harm. And I think that that's how I would answer that. Is every company, you have to make a best effort, but they're always, to your point, the definition of an edge case is a case that you could not foresee or did not foresee, and then you have to try again. Other questions? Raise your hand really high. Yes, sir.
All right. I wanted to ask, how's your journey being a product manager, and what would you say? Would it be a good collaboration being a product designer and a product manager? Thank you.
Yes. So, you're asking maybe is there like a career path from a product designer to product management? Okay. Yeah. Sorry, give him the mic again.
Okay, like probably a product designer also being a product manager.
Uh-huh.
Like, does it work that way? Can you do it together? Then how was your product management? How was the journey like when you became a product manager?
Yeah. So product management is a very fun and interesting job, and it looks very different for different people because you can have very different skill sets and still be very successful as a product manager. I think the thing that unites all good product managers is an obsession over how are you going to solve problems for your users? You have to obsess over and constantly think about how you can deliver value to a user. A user doesn't have to use your product. They certainly don't have to pay for your product. And when you're sitting at a table with designers and engineers and marketers and business people, everyone is going to bring their individual flavor, right? But oftentimes, it is the voice of the user, it is the problems of the user that can be forgotten or kind of not pushed to the side, but it can sometimes take a back seat. And so I would say that whether you're a product designer or you're an engineer or you're a marketer or whatever it is you do, if you start bringing the voice of the user to the table, then you are starting to embody one of the characteristics of what I think are the best product managers. And that goes back to what I said earlier, that product management is something I said earlier is that product management is, you can come from a diverse background, diverse perspectives, but at the end of the day, it's your job to deliver a good experience for people. Next question? Next questions? Yes, sir. We got a question here.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I have a question over here.
Yep.
Okay, so how can AI governance be implemented to ensure safe development for software engineers and also prevent data loss?
How can governance be implemented?
To ensure safe development for
Yep.
software engineers and prevent data loss.
Yes. Okay, great. So, step one is you have to decide what your policies are. You have to decide what your standards are. You have to think about what are the requirements that you must adhere to when you're building. And that's often the hardest part, is literally making the decision around what the policy is. Writing down a policy, writing down a set of standards is step one. Literally writing it down. A lot of people don't even get to that step. Step two, and this is where the engineers in the room, their ears are going to start perking up, which is how do you build these written standards in English? How do you build them into programmatic controls or policies that help you stay on the right path, that make sure you do the right thing? And I think that there are a lot of products and features. Google Cloud certainly has many, but every one of these infrastructure providers recognizes that governance is important, and they're all investing in what those policies should be. Or they're investing in features that let you implement what the policy is. So step one as a startup, or as whatever you are, you just have to decide what those standards are. You might say, we're going to adopt the top 15 controls that Google recommends, and here's how we're going to do that. And you just write that down. Step two is thinking about how do you tune your infrastructure, how do you write the code to actually make that happen. And that's actually something that Google is spending a lot of resources and time on internally for our own work, is how do we help Googlers do the right thing instead of just stopping at that policy step. And I think we're doing a good job of that, and we're increasingly getting better. But I'm biased, obviously. Raise your hand high. I want to take 2 more questions if I can.
Okay.
Raise your hand, really. I want to hear from a woman. Do we have any ladies that want to ask a question?
Okay,
Any
my
more
question.
ladies?
Okay.
Any ladies? Yeah, we got her right here. Can someone run a mic to her? Thank you. Sorry, fellas. Yeah, who over here had your hand raised? Yeah, just raise your hand. Get it raised.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So my question is basically, how does AI verifies someone's intent? For example, I had my own experience. So I was trying to use a particular AI, and then I was trying to ask the AI how to do a brute force attack, but that was for learning purposes. So the AI flagged me, but But then I now had to go through the route of, I'm doing a training, I'm so and so I would like to learn this for this purpose. Normally, AI won't let me use brute force attack, and that was how I found what I was looking for. I did that to another AI, I didn't get that, till I had to go through the route of, okay, can you teach me like a grandpa talking to a grandchild? And then that was how I got what I was looking for. So in things like this, people that actually need this information, how does AI plan to verify the intent of this person? And then for someone that wants to use it for malicious intent, how can you tell, okay, this person is using it for malicious intent or not? That's just my question.
That's a very good question. So I think one of the things, we go back to this idea of logging, right? So once you get to, any application, once you get to a certain level of scale, let's say you're a fintech startup and you're starting to do tons and tons of transactions, or you are providing some kind of chat experience for a teen app or something, and you're starting to get thousands and thousands of interactions. Once you start to get to a certain scale, you're able to start to see the patterns of usage. And when people start behaving outside of those patterns of usage, that can be a signal that they're doing something, at the very least they're doing something novel, but they could also be doing something malicious. So that's something to think about, is at scale, looking at that data and seeing where those anomalies lie. And then the last thing I'll say on that question is, with LLM inputs, there are very good classifiers, right, which help you to categorize certain attributes of what the input is. And over time, those classifiers are getting better and better, and so we're able to detect more malicious intent based on use of classifiers and other filters. So is there one more question? One more. I'm sorry, the time is up, but I'll take one more.
So I think she asked about classifiers to know something that was built with an AI or not. And we have things like 0GBT and the likes. But there's this rise where media that can be used against people as evidence of things they have not done is happening. So is there a zero of that working? Is it in the works, or is there a thing that developers now can do into their AI models that once it is run through a system, you can tell that this image was generated through an AI model? Because yes, we used to be able to tell what was AI or what was not, but I've seen some very convincing images that made me doubt whether it was AI or not. So are there things that are put into the development that can flag as, okay, this was generated by an AI, and once it is stated as evidence of something, it's going to be cancelled as because it wasn't real?
Yeah, so just to summarize, so you're asking, when an image or maybe some content is generated by an AI, how do you know that, number one, was it generated by an AI application or not? And number two, how do you know that it's trustworthy or there's ground truth or not? I'll take the second part of that question, which is, how do you know that content is trustworthy? This is something that Google is working on, and others. We have something called Synth ID, SYNTH ID. And this is something that's in the works, where if you are a trusted source of information, if you're a news outlet or you're any kind of organization and you want to produce images, and you want those images for people to know for sure that that image came from you. Not necessarily whether that image is true or not, because you could have faked that image, right? You could deepfake something, but rather you want others to know that that image came from you and not, someone fake pretending to be you. That's Synth ID, and that allows you to cryptographically sign images and assure your audience that a certain piece of a certain image came from you. So that's something that Google has been working on. Time's up. Everyone's hungry. I'm hungry. Thank you so much, everybody. So great to meet you. I'll be over here. I'm going to have a bunch of stickers, and I have white papers and stuff. Come say hi. We'll see you later. Thank you.